gotta review my notes. Hey everyone, welcome back to Renee's Book Club. I am Renee, of course. This is actually our very first actual review of a book. The book we're discussing today, as I'm sure you saw from the title, is going to be The Boys from Biloxi by John Grisham. This book is still very popular. It came out a couple years ago in 2022. Obviously, John Grisham, a very popular writer with many books. He pumps out a lot of books all the time. And so this is seemingly one of his most popular ones in recent years, at least to me. And it popped up on my radar and I was able to read it. I read it on my Kindle. It took me a couple of days. I definitely want to, of course, talk about what the book is about. As always, there's going to be some mild spoilers. And then we're going to go into my analysis and what I think about the book, and ultimately my recommendations, conclusions, and ratings. So let's get into it. So what is this book about, Boys from Biloxi? It's a very interesting book to me. It's a very straightforward book, and the plot really revolves around two families in Mississippi, along the coast of Mississippi, the Rudys and the Malcos. And really, it's a tale, as it says, of boys from Biloxi. And it's primarily about Keith, Rudy, and Hugh Malco, but it's also a story about their fathers, Lance and Jesse. And so those are the two sets of boys from Biloxi. The book takes place over the course of many decades, but primarily sets between the 60s and the 80s. At the beginning of the book, we really get to a nice background in terms of the setting that we're in. The book was inspired by real life events, and so there was a little bit of history, a bit of exposition at the beginning, and we really get to meet the families. And at the beginning, they're really seemingly very similar to each other. They're both descendants of Croatian immigrants who settled into the coast of Mississippi. But they take two different paths. The Malcos end up going into a life of crime and into the underworld, whereas the Rudys really go into law and eventually serving in government. Our two main protagonists, Keith and Hugh, grow up together. They grow up as really close best friends. They play baseball together, but as their lives continue, their paths separate. And so really we follow inevitably as those two paths come back during their lives multiple times and are intertwined and inevitably cause conflict because they're on opposite sides of the law. And so through that journey, we really see them go up against each other, and we really see how the choices that they have made, and really how their families have made those choices, have ultimately led them, we're talking about Keith and Hugh, to grow apart and really inevitably become enemies. And so there are really highs and really low lows in the journey and the lives of these characters. A couple plot twists that I actually did not see coming. If I'm being honest, it caught me off guard. But it's a great tale of a family, of friendship, of the choices that we make. And so that's really what happens throughout the book. So let's go into my thoughts and my analysis and really what spoke to me about this book. So what's interesting about The Boys from Biloxi is that, to me, it's a story about multiple things. It's about generational choices. It's about generational trauma. It's an immigrant story as well. It's also a classic story of criminal versus lawman. And that makes it a very straightforward read, which is quite nice. And I will say I was very surprised but very grateful for the world building. I'm a big fan of getting a lot of characters with a lot of exposition so we know who we're talking about, and really seemingly random details throughout the book I was a very big fan of. It is, I will say, and I admittedly, I know this is a book that is not exactly meant to be particularly groundbreaking in its storytelling, but there are a few themes that come out, and they're sprinkled throughout. To me, it seems to remind the reader that, hey, the choices that we make in our lives can affect not just us, but our children, our friends, our extended family, and we might put them in a place where they may not have any choice but to continue that cycle. Now, it is important to note that, of course, both in real life and in the text, this doesn't have to be the case. While Keith follows in his father's footsteps as a lawyer, and then as a district attorney, and as an attorney general, and the same goes for Hugh, who follows his father down the criminal path. Within their families, there are people who don't do that, right? Keith has siblings who are very different from him. They're described as a little bit more impulsive, a little bit more on the edge, and Hugh has siblings who literally leave the family behind because they have no interest in the life of crime. And so it's important, seemingly it was very important to the author to both recognize that the pressures of whatever setting you put people in your life in are real. There are ways to get out of those cycles. And I think that's an important message to convey and to talk about. The book is also very much about friendship, and how ultimately friendship and empathy, because of it, can really quench the thirst of vengeance that we see in the book. Namely, Keith, after the very dramatic turn in the book happens, Keith is very much, at first, seemingly reduced to a very simple character that is just looking for revenge, which was very much not like him and that of his family. But at the end, we see him have empathy for Hugh and his family, and really, be true to himself as we have gotten to know him throughout the book. So it was really nice to see that at the end of the book, because it certainly looked for a moment like it wasn't going to happen. So I did enjoy that quite a bit. The story also goes into a couple other topics, one of them being immigration and the immigrant story. Obviously, that is a very popular subject right now in the U.S. To me, it seemed to really highlight a couple of the results of the way we settle immigrants here in the United States, in which sometimes they are put in positions where they may have to make a hard choice of fully integrate within the communities that they're in and really follow the law, which the majority do. But sometimes, depending on the circumstance, some people are faced with the choice of crime, and some people will take that. And so it was very much an immigrant story of, no matter what side that they were on of the law, they were ultimately just trying to put their families ahead. Obviously with very different intentions and for very different reasons. But at the base of it, both Lance, Malco, and Jesse Rudy were just trying to have the best for their families as they saw fit and based on their own personal convictions. And so overall, what is my thought of the book? I thought the book was a very easy read. I think I recommend it to anybody that is interested in a very classic good versus bad guy story. Anybody who's interested in it seemed a little bit Western to me in a way. There's a couple of like heist scenes throughout the book. There's a couple of courtroom scenes, actually quite a few courtroom scenes. So it definitely felt a little bit like a Western. It felt a little bit like a legal procedural type of show. If you've ever seen any of those on TV, it definitely felt like I was watching something like that. So if you enjoy a little bit of historical fiction, if you enjoy some legal scenes in your books, if you enjoy, a book that stretches throughout time, a book that ties a couple of different themes, then I would probably recommend this book. If you're looking for a book that maybe touches on a lot of subjects but doesn't really go too deeply into any single one of them, this is definitely a book I would recommend. It's not too deep of a book, because like I said, at its base, it's really a story about friendship. It's a story about forgiveness. It's a story of people making choices versus good and evil. And so overall, I would recommend this book to some people, not everyone. It's a very casual read. In terms of rating and on a point system, I would give it a 7 out of 10 on a point system, and maybe like a 3.5 stars out of 5. So that is my review. That's my honest thoughts on the book. Again, it was an enjoyable read. I finished it in a couple of days, as I read very casually. So thank you everyone for joining me here today. I hope you liked it. I hope this was useful. If you have read the book, let me know on what you think of what I've said. Maybe I've missed something completely, which is entirely possible. And if you haven't read it and you choose to, come back later and tell me what you think. I'll see you in the next video where we talk about another book. As always, feel free to comment, like, subscribe, share, everything that you possibly can. And thank you for being here. See you on the next one.